Okay, so we are discussing web applications and their hosting. And as I mentioned, whenever we talk about hosting, it's distributed environment. We're talking about web server, application server, database servers, okay, and depending upon the type, language you selected, infrastructure would vary. And we discussed that we have two options, internal hosting or external hosting, okay. So in internal hosting, what do you think would be the advantages we can harvest when we go for internal hosting? If we decided the applications that we build will be hosted internally, what would be the advantages? Control on what? Yeah, you have entire control on how to basically this application will get deployed, how, and again on that server, what other applications will be residing as well. When things are external provider, you don't know what other applications are residing on the server. And if some applications have loopholes, they may compromise the server. But in the case of your own premises, you can ensure that okay, only this application would be residing on this server because it's of critical nature. So you would have some you have full control on decision making. What else? Okay, what would be the issues? What would be the challenges?
The cost of setting up the infrastructure.
Cost of setting up the infrastructure. Cost would be high. So first initial investment to set up that infrastructures, the servers, again there will be backup servers that will basically kick up in case of certain failure of main server, and then maintaining that server, okay. And in order to maintain that, definitely you would need some resources, okay, some manpower. Are they technical enough? They understand the technologies, okay. So their salaries, maintaining the system. So there's a lot of cost involved when you're going for in-house hosting. And secondly, when you're doing in-house house hosting, you have to identify whether this website would be accessible within the enterprise, or would it have some external interface as well. Would people be able to access this website from outside of premises as well? In ECU, we have certain websites we cannot access directly, especially staff websites. We need to connect through VPN because they are configured for local local internet. Okay, so these decisions need to be made. If it is internally that's fine. But if it externally, you have to basically provide some support, infrastructure support, so that people can access that website for external as well. And when it is being accessed externally, then definitely you have to take into account certain precaution measures. Okay, sometimes you apply restrictions by using certain user and password, that only these registered user can access these websites. Or sometimes you create subdomains like it.ecu.edu.pk, and it.ecu.pk domain is accessed but not the main website. So you can create subdomains that which will be subdirectory in your application, that this subdirectory can be accessed externally but not the main directory. Okay, so you can define subdomains, or you can use some different authentication mechanism to restrict access to the resources. So as your fellow mentioned, if it's in-house, you have full control. You can take care of variable security issues, privacy issues, and so on. But in this case, if it is being accessible from outside, it needs a fixed IP. As we all know, if websites are set on local intranet and it is being accessed on local intranet, then you don't need fixed IP, especially because you know that in local network the scheme is 192.168. So on. So this is the scheme which is being IP address schemes used in the local network. But the IP addresses which are assigned to the computers that are connected to the internet is different. It's 200 something. Okay, so if you need your system to be accessed by external entities, then your IP address should be something like 200 something, and it should not change. So you need fixed IP in this case, and fixed IP are expensive. Okay, so against your domain name, you can purchase fixed IP that will remain as long as your registration is, and user can basically access your website. So there's again you need some extra staff in order to maintain this, and things become expensive as well. So what would be the advantages we can harvest using external hosting. We saw there's a lot of cost involved when we are going for in-house hosting. Technical resources are involved and so on. You want to say something? Yeah. Convenience. You don't need to do anything. So it reduces your burden of having technical people. And cloud computing that's why it's being adopted by many companies, because you don't need to make a lot of investment into your infrastructure. You can use computing resources, and you can pay for that time for the time that you have utilized those cloud resources. So there is convenience over there, and you don't need to hire those technical people. They are in fact the people who would be working over there would be highly professionals, because those external hosting service providers need people who would definitely on top of their skills. Okay. But over there, service level agreements become critical. So whenever there is service involved, we want some guarantees from the service provider. So whenever we engage with these external hosting providers, we sign up service level agreements that okay, we want our website to be 98% live all the time. 2%, that's fine. But if website goes down, it should not take 1 hour for backup to take on the main website and so on. So these service level agreements are defined, and provider, if does not comply with those service level agreements, then penalties basically apply on the provider side. So again, it depends upon service level agreement how things have been negotiated. Okay, if the desired service level is not being achieved, what would be the penalty, or what advantage can be given to the client? They will also provide you very advanced features. Okay, load balancing. If your website is very popular and requests are coming from all around the world, they can balance the load. They might have server in USA, in Europe, in Middle East. They can balance the load. Middle East requests would be served by servers that are in Middle East. The request from USA they will not send to the Middle East server. So load balancing can be provided by the hosting service providers, and it increases the performance of your application. Okay, you don't need to worry about these things. Okay. Scaling up resources, especially in cloud computing. If first 6 months sales are low, you might not be using any virtual machine in the environment, and you don't need to pay. If next 6 months the hits increase, then resources will be scaled up, and accordingly you have to pay. So scaling up resources is quite easy in case of external hosting service providers. But regarding application error, they are not responsible. So anything that regards to your business logic, you are responsible. If some errors comes into your website, some issues, they will not provide you any support. You will have access to the system, you will have access to the resources that belongs to you, and you have to fix those errors. So you does need support from the company who is building your software to basically keep providing you services for maintenance of the software. So when you engage with these hosting services, it's not like that you have to talk to the technical people in order to execute all the jobs. Rather, nowadays the interface, they are very intuitive and easy to use. Have you seen cPanel interface? How many of you? Just raise your hand. Yeah, so few of them. So cPanel interface provides you a very easy to use graphical user interface and very simple wizards that can guide you how to even move your web application from one hosting provider to another hosting provider. For example, if the current hosting service provider does not provide you the desired level of service and you want to move, through cPanel you can package your application and you can select the destination where this application needs to go, and you can submit your job, and your application will move to new destination. If you want to access the database and want to update some record, cPanel provides interface like PHPMyAdmin to access MySQL database. You can access the database, you can manipulate the records and so on. So you want to update certain code. There is file manager in cPanel. There is editor as well that can open the code in the browser. You can change the code and you can update the file. So there is very easy, convenient way tools are provided that you can use in order to maintain your website and can fix the bugs that are in your application. These hosting providers also provides you some capabilities like payment gateway. If you want to use payment gateway in your application, they have already package available in your they call it AMP panel, like cPanel. It's your customized what you can say customized landing page where you will have a link available and you can install that package within your application. Okay. Similarly, shopping cart. So these are the things usually they provide you can add in your application. But in this case, you will not have control on your web application the way you had in your local environment. Okay. If some applications that are also running on the machine, and if something happens to them, they may compromise the server as well. So relational database management systems is also very critical in this regard. You are defining the business logic. That business logic needs to retrieve the input and then process it and maybe save it in a database. So relational database management systems decisions are very critical, and depending upon the task you're doing, you have to identify which RDBMS is suitable for you. Like we have a variety of them. MySQL is open source, whereas Microsoft SQL Server is proprietary in nature, but it provides you very advanced features that may not be available in MySQL, and so on. So you have to decide whether you are going for free technologies, or your client can pay for these proprietary solutions. And certain databases, because databases may be holding huge amount of data, which we call big data, it might be possible that the engine you are using, it runs on multiple processing environment. So for each processor, you have to pay for the licenses. Nowadays, we have in-memory databases like SAP. In-memory databases, basically, entire database is loaded into the RAM. Okay, and they are specialized machine, especially SAP is building them, that basically provide real-time analysis on big data application. Okay. As we all know, for critical applications where the data is very critical, we do have a backup, and backup is basically configured as a mirror. So whatever is being changes or data inserted in the main server, it will get copied to the backend server as well. Because application is critical, if something happens to the main server, we will have the information on the backup server. And we will never allow public access to the databases, and that's a security issue. Okay, we don't want end user to manipulate data directly. That's why we have well-defined measures through forms and well-defined connections who can do what roles, configuration policies to update the data. So this is basically the mirroring concept which we discuss over here. So all the traffic goes to your web server. Okay, and web server and application server, basically from web server it goes to application server, and application server start execution of the code. And within that code you define, okay, where the server is located, where database engine is installed. Okay, you need IP address, you need user and password, and then you can log into that server, which is database server. And then you can select the database, and from the database you can select the table. So what we are trying to, what we see over here is the backup server, which we call it failover server. If something happens with the server, the backup server can take over, and your application will still be running. Now, important question is how much backup level you should have. In cloud computing, especially, your data get replicated, maybe 3 to 4 instances on different machines. Okay, and it will be more secure. If you have only one failover backup servers, then there's still risk involved. What if you are not able to recover this database server and this may get compromised? So depending upon the critical nature of the data, some people take backup of this data as well on some external storage devices. So firewalls are again critical that restrict access to these servers, and we call this demilitarized zone, which is basically anyone can access your resources. So that's why we have web server. That is the entry point to receive all the requests. We don't let user, or we don't relieve the identity of our database server where data is residing. All requests should be come to web server. That's why when we register our domain, it basically refers to a machine that is running a web server, and most of the time the port 80 is open for web server request. So this is the information which is publicly available. What is the information of database server, or where it is residing? This information is not available in public domain. This is kept secret, okay, in order to avoid any lapse. So that's why if you have something on machine, especially if you have selected certain machine, in order to deploy this application, it should not have any extra software. It should not have any other installations that are not required by the clients. Okay, and by minimizing the software installation on that machine reduces the risk of issues with the server. And by closing all the ports other than 80, basically make your server more secure. So it's again privacy and security issues which we need to address. So the web application, when we are building, is basically development environment. Okay, and when applications development is complete, we go and start testing of the application, and we call it test environment. Test environment is always different from development environment, especially in big companies. They have separate development environment, separate developers, and when development is complete, they give it to the testers, and they have separate environment, separate machines in order to test this software. Now, test environment should mimic exactly what was the things in development environment. The way development environment is configured, same thing should be in test environment. This environment should be basically a replica of each other. Okay, why is it important? Why we want test environment to be exactly same as that of development environment?
So it runs the exact same.
Pardon?
So it runs the exact same.
So it runs exactly same. So whatever expected output we got in while development, it should be available in the test environment as well. Okay, if something is wrong, it can be fixed easily. Okay, because the environments are exactly the same. So what we are talking about over here, the languages, the version especially. So PHP version 5 is different from PHP version 7. There are some commands which are depreciated now. They are supported in PHP 5, but they are not supported in PHP 7. So if you do, while development, if you have used PHP 5 and you use those commands, but while in test environment you have PHP 7 configured. So in PHP 7 those commands may not run and it will give errors, and tester will say, oh, this code is not working, and developer will say this is working. So these should be exactly the same. Similarly, web server version should be same. Database server, security privileges, policies, procedures, they should exactly be the same, so that you can test the application, the logic, rather than getting mingled with other things which may not directly related to the testing of the code. So code, libraries, and includes. These are very critical in your main logic program. As we discussed, main logic program basically outlines the sequence of steps you need to do, and while doing that sequence steps, you define the variables, you do the housekeepings, and then you define the loops through which you basically iterate through all the information, and then you can print the summaries or whatever you want to do. Now in main logic program, it might possible that you need to include certain information which will not be within the main program. You include it from the external files. Okay, the way we include packages, libraries, similarly we can include other functionality which is part of this application, but they are not residing in the same file. They are not in the same file, so we need to include them. So, and why we use this? Menu systems. Now in web pages, we know that each and every page should have a menu, and it should be similar. It should not be like that. The main page have menu in certain style, but the inner pages, they are totally different. So what we can do, we can define menus somewhere in a file, and then why not we include that file into all the files of our application. Similarly, database connection. We should not be defining database connection on each and every page. We should define one file and then include that file into our main line flow of logic. Similarly, authentications and logs. Logs are critical, especially for debugging of information, and maybe for we will see to keep the track what to see the user pattern of using the user behavior pattern in order to recommend the information, recommend the product, especially in e-commerce websites. Now how we can do this? So in case of PHP, we have this special tag called include, and then we can give a file name. So what are we doing over here? We defined a menu file. Okay, we define a menus over here, and we save that file as menu.php. Now in the entire website, all the files we can reuse it. For example, in this case, we have index.php file. Index.php file, if we have to use this menu, we just include it on top of our file, and this will basically display menus like this as depicted on the figure. So this way we can define left panel navigation, we can define footer, we can define a login box in certain file, and we can include all those in our main file. In this case is index.php, and this is the graphical representation. So we are trying to focus on main flow of our logic, okay, and we define modules, we can call it. Similarly, we can have these functionalities. If we are not using framework, we can define these things in separate file, and we can include them into our main program. But we have to be careful when we are saving these files separately from our when we are using this code separately in different file. The extension of file would be very critical. Why? We want to ensure that no user will be able to access these files directly. Because, for example, in case of database connection file that contains user and password, IP address of the server, we don't want user to see that IP address. We want to hide that. That's why we code them in such a fashion that once they are written in PHP, PHP get compiled by application server, the user will not be able to see what is the ultimate address. Let me show you this example first, and it will make more sense to you. For example, we have a DB connection file, and if I don't save this file with PHP extension and I give it a different extension, like in this case is INSC, or I may give it make it TXT, and if directory browsing is on the web server and user is able to click that file, then user will be able to see all the information that we want to keep secret. If user are able to access this information, then they can directly attack the server. Okay, then they don't need to go through web server. Okay, so this is what we need to hide. So how applications do it? Basically, if especially in case of .NET technologies, we can define a virtual folder. Virtual folder can reside anywhere on machine, but we configure that with the web server. So web server only knows where this virtual folder is residing. So we don't basically give access to the physical address of that folder to the user. User will not be able to access where this folder is physically residing, whether this is on root or maybe some subdirectory in a root and so on. Always give extension to a file which is processable, like PHP, ASPX, because when those files get executed, user will not be able to see any information. For example, if you have a PHP code in a file and you have PHP extension, if you execute that code and you are not printing anything, user will not be able to see anything. Okay, so it will not display anything. Okay, so executable extensions, so that browser can execute those files. Users should not be able to view the source of those files. So this is how we can avoid this situation. And if you're using frameworks, frameworks basically handle these situations very well, because you configure them in certain fashion, and frameworks take care of security and privacy of that information. Okay, so the last topic which we will discuss today is application features. So today we see almost each and every business have their web application, web-based interface, and those applications vary to a great deal. But there are always some common features which you see in web application. Okay, and what are those common features? First of all, navigation. No matter what sort of application you have, you would have definitely certain navigation scheme that can help the user to navigate easily through your web contents. So style, how those links are defined, it should be consistent across the website. Okay, otherwise it will be annoying to the user if style change. It may be confuse the user. If on first page you have navigation on the top, on second page you have navigation on the left, on third page you have navigation on the bottom. This will not make any sense. And we need to make it consistent on all pages. It should not be there like that. You miss one page and user basically land on that page, then he cannot go back. Then he would use the browser back button to go to that page. Okay. So, and we always avoid user to use that back button, because if you want to for example, if you are in a wizard and users use this back button, it may affect the working of your wizard. You want to use your next and forward wizard button so that your application work in a proper fashion. One technique which many websites use is breadcrumbs. So there are libraries available which you can use, and you can create navigation in this fashion. So as user is browsing, basically it is being depicted on the top, so that user know how basically he reached to this information and how it can go back. Okay. Ideally, it should not be no more than 3 clicks in order for user to reach to the specific information. So maximum of your pages, the contents you have, should take maximum 3 clicks. If they are more than that, then you need to reorganize your web pages. The hierarchy you need to redefine. Okay? If it 10 clicks user takes to reach to certain information, that's not good.
What about the situation where you have a pop-up box, or you go to a separate new web page?
Pop-up.
What do you do with that in
So why would you have pop-up box?
navigation?
Why would you need a pop-up box and go to the next page?
No, either or. You might have a pop-up box saying
Okay.
to put in your username, your login details or something like that.
Okay.
How does that fit into your navigation scheme? And also the situation where you've got you click on some links on a web page and it takes you and creates a new web page.
Okay. So some websites, especially coming to login page, some websites would have some login box already on the right side. No matter on which page you go, it would be there. Some websites, they provide a link, and when you click a link, it basically open a div which is dynamic HTML div tag. It is basically, you can call it a pop-up. It could be a JavaScript pop-up as well that can ask you to enter login information. That's fair enough. On second click, user is able to provide information, and then once you submit information, page get reloaded, and user will be able to land on its login the landing page. So that's fine, pretty fine. But most of the websites you see, they would constantly have login box on the right side. So whenever user want to log in, he can do it straight away. So that is within. So maximum 1 click is required in most of the websites. Okay. Secondly, sometimes pages are being generated on the move, on the run, especially the products. So instead of in that case, you can create a list. So the list of all the products is being displayed, and user click any link, then you can dynamically show some extra information. So there are ways you can reduce the number of clicks. Okay. And again, these are guiding rules. So if something is unique in your context, then that's fine, especially in data-driven application. In .NET, if you have seen the grid control, you can Google some videos. A grid box can open 10 to 15 grids, especially in financial transactions, financial accounting. Maybe open 10 to 15 grids in order to manipulate some information, and it can go back. So zoom in, zoom out is available, especially if you're dealing with massive amount of information. So graphical user interface, we discussed frameworks like Bootstrap. They help you basically to make your graphical user interface consistent. If you do it by yourself, then you have to be very careful. You have to define style sheets. One way is to define style sheets separately and then reuse it. Second way is you can define styles within your web pages, but that will require more hard work in order to maintain, to update them. So you have to take decisions how you move forward in order to make consistent look and feel of your web pages. What should be the font size, colors, and the way contents are organized on the different web pages. how you would display images. If images are not there, what information would be displayed, the alternate text, what should be the font of that one, should it blink or arrow, some animation would be there. So these are the things you should need to define. We always try, especially in web application, try to avoid extra plugins, okay, because they may affect working of your business applications, okay. So if you want to use it, then test it thoroughly, okay. And if you are not using Bootstrap, then you have to identify how, and you want your clients to access your website through desktop PCs to mobiles, then you have to define how your website will get adjusted according to the client who is trying to access your website on different machines. But if Bootstrap made it quite easy for you, especially if you're developing something from scratch, try to develop in HTML5. HTML5, as I mentioned to you, they have many built-in layouts you can use to define your application. So if someone is accessing from mobile, different layout will be selected. If someone is accessing from desktop machine, a different layout can be set for the application. We all know issue with browser compatibility, especially your application should run on the main browsers like IE, Mozilla, Safari and Chrome as well, okay. So why we get compatibility issue? Because of different JavaScript versions. Different browsers supports different version of JavaScripts, and different version of JavaScripts basically create sometimes difficulty for the developers to basically code multiple cases so that your application can run in IE, Firefox, Safari as well as Chrome, okay. So this is one challenge which you need to face. But most of the cases backward compatibility is being provided in the browser. The previous version of JavaScript was supported, so it can run. But again, it's up to you to be careful whenever there is new versions are coming in. You have to keep updating your JavaScript packages and so on. And all these decisions basically you have to take in consultation with the client, that your application may run good on this machine. For example, most of the Microsoft applications, they run very well in IE, but you may not get same results when you're using Chrome. Those are the basically compatibility issue. If there are ActiveX controls, Microsoft using Microsoft technologies, you can build certain plugins, we call them ActiveX, and you can use them in web pages. Now those plugins will work very well in IE, but they will not work as they're working in IE as compared to Chrome or other web browsers. In every application, we do have to manage users. Users are able to create accounts. They are able to customize their look and feel of their web stores, for example, if it is an e-commerce website and so on. So we need to provide capabilities like adding user, editing or removing users and so on. So in most of the web applications today, we need this functionality, okay. And when we are doing it, we need to take into account the measures so that we can easily do it for entire application. For example, in case of password management, we all know that whenever user forget password, we have some proper scheme for user to engage in order to retrieve his password. We may ask user to basically he can make 3 attempts. After 3 attempts, account may get locked, and after that he may need to call the customer service in order to re-invoke his account. So these are the measures which you need to identify. Okay, in your application, how these things will be taken. If your application is creating an account, what sort of information is required? Who will activate the account? Email will go to the user to activate his account, or it will be by default. Okay, would user be creating password through that email after that email has been authenticated, or user can give user password in the first go, and for activation only a link should be sent to the user, and when he clicks the link, he will be able to log in into the system. So these are the things you need to define, and you need to communicate it to the client as well, that this is how the system will work, and so on. You might have a scheme of password, secret passwords, secret questions that can help the user to get the password. In this case, there will be no email involved. If user forgot the password, he will be prompted for certain questions to be answered. If he answers the questions, he can log in. So in this case, there will be no email involved. So functionality will change in your web application. So these are the things which you need to be careful when you are defining your logic, that how these things will be handled in your application. And you need to follow certain practices which are being used in all web applications, especially when you're creating accounts. They will always do fields to ask password, so that user, if mistakenly made a mistake in typing of password, you can validate it using the second field. So all the best practices that are being used in industry, try to follow them. Creating logs is also quite common in almost every application. The objective could be different. So for example, in some applications that are critical security related application, we may need to log each and every user who logged into this application, what they did, and when they log out after doing their work. So, and this information is critical for audit purposes. Or it may be some other websites where we just need, especially, let me go to next slide. You can go through this information. This is quite easy, especially click streams. We all know that in today's e-commerce websites, they are basically recording our patterns, how we are basically navigating the website, which products we are clicking, and accordingly on the right panel or left panel you are getting recommendations. So click stream analysis is again capturing the data in the form of logs, and then doing data mining on those logs, and then they recommend products to the customer. So this is an example of creating logs as well. And through these logs, we can also identify certain unusual pattern. If someone is trying to access the systems during night, and we see the pattern that attempts are not increasing, we can basically spot that behavior, and we can investigate why this is happening. So these logs are very, very critical in that cases as well. Validation and error messaging. Every website would have this. Now, how this would be managed? Should you define the when you define the field to enter a date, should you basically guide the user that this is a format, because in USA format is different than Australia. So you need to guide the user in order to what information you're expecting. And if there is error, should you display this error on the after page has been submitted, or you should display it on the client side? And how it should be displayed? Should they display somewhere in the bottom, listing them together, or they should be displayed next to the field? So all these things you need to take into account. Okay, and if you're not using a framework that can repopulate the entire form, then you might need session variables, so that when users submit the form and something went wrong, he can come back and the fields will be auto-populated. Now, how those fields are populated? When user submitted the form, we retrieve the variables and we created session variables. And all session variables that are created on the server side, they can be accessed again by the application. So when user go back, we access those variables and we assign those variables to these fields again. Okay, so these are the things which you need to take care of if you're not using a framework. Accessibility, again, this is one of the common features which we require in all web applications, that impaired people, they should be able to access your web application. And World Wide Web is a consortium that basically defines standards for web technologies. All the latest technologies, they basically adhere to certain standards, and W3C is the body that governs those standards. And this standard basically being applied on Australian government website as well, especially Australian main government website. It is compliant. But it was expected that by 2015 all the websites, especially government websites, should have been compliant by these standards. I don't know what's the status, but this was set as a goal by the government. So that's it for today, and you see that those basic structures can help you to build applications, and you can build modules, but the main flow of your logic is very critical. It tells you what you need to expect as input, and using that input you can basically produce some output. Okay. Whenever you start taking output, housekeeping is very critical. You need to define the variables, and then you need to initialize those variables with the value that user is given before going to validation or computing certain information. So your main program logic is very critical, how it should loop through those informations, pieces of variables in order to validate the information and computes which is required in the business logic. And being a good programmer and designer, you need to follow the divide and conquer strategy. You should define subcomponents in your application that you can test independent of your entire application. It will definitely increase your development performance as well as it increase the testing performance of the testers. Yep, that's it for today. Do you have any question? Yep. End of file. So your main logic starts from some depending on some conditions, and it will end on certain conditions. So end of file, end of records. If you want to process 50 employees information, so that will be the end of file, the top 50 records from the database. Okay. So today's lecture is if you look at the slides, you can go through it quickly. So this is more on practices, best practices that you can follow when you are developing your web application. Okay. If you don't have any question, then I will see you in the lab. Thank you very much.